What's up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Surf and Sales Podcast. I am Scott Leese, one of your two co-hosts of the show, here with my good friend and partner, Richard Harris. How's it going, Richard? You get your voice back yet?
No, it is still horrible. I went and had my chest x-rayed yesterday. I am 3 weeks out of well, I'll just go ahead and say it.
Yeah,
A
I was just about to
colonoscopy.
say, can you just let everybody know?
Yeah. So nothing quite says coming out of a colonoscopy with 2.5 weeks sore throat, and you're just kind of wondering what the fuck happened. So, oh, sorry, Mrs. Leese. Sorry. There's the first one. I was warned.
We're gonna keep score today.
Yes.
Curse tracker.
So now I'm just like annoyed and frustrated, and I've talked to all the doctors and the anesthesiologists and all the stupidity they made in the whole process. And I'm sure I sound better than the day I spoke to you right after, Scott.
Yeah, you sound a little better, but I'll handle most of the speaking duties,
Yes.
which our audience probably prefers anyways.
Probably. So the hope is that my big fear, Scott, was that I was going to go have this long x-ray yesterday, and that they were going to tell me, oh my God, Richard, something's wrong, and you're going to have to miss Dreamforce again for the second year in a row. And I was like, that was my worst nightmare. And I was just so that's not happening.
You're all clear. You're all clear.
Yeah.
We've got
enough of me.
Yeah. Enough about you. We've got a special show today. It's Alyson Baber is here. She's the former VP of sales over at Outreach. She's an LP. She's been a sales leader for a long time. She's got an amazing career. But perhaps most interestingly, this is where we're going to start. Alyson is a graduate from the University of Miami at Ohio. And somehow this led to her getting to her role at Outreach. So Alyson, welcome to the show. And let's start there. Tell everybody where the heck Miami of Ohio is and how it led to you getting this role at Outreach.
Thanks, Scott. And it's really great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Longtime listener, I guess, first time guest, but really excited to be here. I went to Miami University in Ohio, in Oxford, Ohio, who, if you don't know about it, it's in a really small town, but it's the quintessential perfect college town. And how it led to my role at Outreach was I interviewed with the SVP of sales, and he also went to Miami of Ohio. And blood runs thick at Miami of Ohio. So we shared like our stories and like what year did we graduate and all of these things. And then in my follow-up email—
Were you ever drunk at the same party though? Were you ever drunk at the same party?
We weren't there at the same time. And that would also allude that I've, ever been drunk in my life, which if you know me, that is definitely a very sarcastic comment. But so we definitely shared some of our glory days stories. But then in the follow-up thank you email that I sent to him after our interview, I used a subject line that I had actually learned from Jason Bay when we went through one of his sales trainings at Zoom. And it was to include like 3 words that are relevant to some extent while you're reaching out, but then are maybe just attention grabbing. So I used a subject line that said, I can't remember the exact subject line, but one of the words that I put in there was bagel and deli. And if you've been to Miami of Ohio, or if you went to school there, you would know exactly what bagel and deli was. And then I proceeded with my thank you note. And he wrote back saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you referenced bagel and deli. My favorite bagel was this. I believe it was on this kind of bagel. And then we shared our favorite bagels. And it was a very much a late night place at Miami of Ohio. Anyways, stories have been told that he forwarded that message to others at the company and said that this is one of the best thank you notes that I've ever received. So it just helped to build rapport, camaraderie, and not just your standard, like, thank you for the time follow-up email.
Yeah. Two things of importance here. Number one, thank you emails or messages or cards are alive and well and still matter and make an impact. And the second thing is, apparently saying, hey, you went to the same school as me actually does work still, Richard.
If you use it the same way, if you use it the right way.
If you use it in a different context.
Right. So I could do that at University of Arizona, and I could reference Dirt Bags, which was the bar, or I could reference Sausage Deli, which is the deli, and that would work. right? I agree
Yeah.
with you. Not the, you know,
But you
I
have
could
to go
probably still
deeper
reference,
than
I could go bear down, right? Which is the standard U of A thing, but that's even generic now.
that's
So
not deep enough, I don't think.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think a lot of colleges use bear down now potentially as well. So,
yeah.
but I think you're right. I think once something becomes popular, it becomes obsolete. Like any email or reference, especially when you're trying to get someone's attention. So this just happened to stand out, but yeah, it was
Scott, that she just nailed us. You know, once we became popular, we became obsolete. That's
true.
the problem we're running into,
That's
right?
the same thing that happens in sales. Once you
Right.
popularize a particular channel, then what humans do best is we exploit something, use it up, and then discard it. This is exactly what we've done with the phone, what we've done with email, right? And I'm sure we'll
what's
do with
happening with
the next
LinkedIn.
thing. With
Yeah, what's happening
LinkedIn.
with
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I mean, I'm hesitant to accept anyone's, invite these days because I just think it's going to turn around immediately into a pitch or an ask or, something that's even if it seems like they're trying to give me something, it's unsolicited. So it's,
What is the type of invite that does grab your attention and that you will accept?
So it's interesting. I recently saw some of your
That
posts.
bagel reference.
You have to have a cool college, restaurant or bar story to reference. No, I'm just teasing, but for me, I was just having this conversation and I've seen some of your recent content on LinkedIn and I've heard this in other podcasts too, that I think, getting back to like a human touch and an actual network introduction can go a long way. And I just met with someone that I used to work with at Zoom that's actually building a company around this and kind of your network. And I mean, that's another reason why I even got an interview at Outreach was because of my network and an introduction that somebody placed on my behalf. And so I think anytime that you can reference a personal connection, not just somebody that you might be connected with on LinkedIn with your hundreds of thousands of followers, like that would maybe fall flat for you, Scott and Richard. But for me, I have a lot of connections that I'm not connected with, like personally, but I have a lot of connections that I am connected with personally, that if they reach out or if I reach out to them with an introduction or somebody asking me, can you introduce me to this person, it goes a long way. And we found that at Outreach and when I was at Zoom and at other companies that, getting a foot in the door with one of our customers can go a long way. I'll give you a quick story example. We were working with an account and they were close to renewal. And I was responsible for a good portion of my time at Outreach for existing business and renewals. And someone on my team said, do you know this person? And I said, actually, they used to live across the hall from me when I lived in San Francisco. And they said, we've been trying for months to get in touch with someone at this company. But a quick message to this person saying, hey, would it be okay if we connected one-on-one? My team's been trying to get in touch with someone at your company. Immediately, she responded within 30 minutes saying, yep, happy to set up some time. So I think getting away from the gimmicks and getting back to the personal connection and the not just personalization, but personal can go a long way.
So it's got to make sure I'm not on mute, which will happen some point today. But I sort of look at your resume, right, of all the places you were. And, for those who don't know, so you were a director of sales at SendGrid. You had senior sales leader, commercial segment leader at Zoom. You were at a company called Melio, and then you were at Outreach. And again, just for reference, you were at Zoom all the way, you were at SendGrid in 2015, right? Zoom, you were there for 2018 to 2021. And now you've been at Outreach.
I think 26, but yeah, it's close.
2016.
Close to 5 years.
So
yeah, before the pandemic.
Yeah. What is still the consistent problem in 9 years that you've seen in sales? Is there a consistent one? And that doesn't mean that, well, this is the problem, but it's morphed because of technology. But do you see a consistent issue? Because I feel like I still see it, but I'm just curious for someone who's been in the trenches a little bit more recently than me, what you see.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, really interesting question. And I'm really curious now to hear your answer. For me, in my personal experience, there are two things that I think can be a challenge to any company. If they're not working, it's going to be a really tough uphill battle. And I've worked at companies, very fortunately, across my career, that have done this really well. And then I've worked at companies that maybe have struggled in this area a little bit. And the two things are customer care and satisfaction, and a product that really works and does what it says it's going to do. And if both of those things, or even one of those things, isn't true, sales is going to be an uphill battle, whether it's from acquiring new customers or retaining your existing customer base or expanding your customer base as well. Why would somebody want to expand on a product that's not working, or where they're not getting service, or where they're not seeing the experience that they thought they were signing up for? And those have been true, whether it was 2 months ago or 10 years ago. And I've seen the gamut from Fortune 500 companies that I've worked at and startup companies with less than 200 people. So yeah, I think that's where I land.
And by the way, you've also been an advisor for many, many companies too. So what are they getting wrong, or what can they do? Let's say there's an early stage founder, right? They've got founder-led sales. They've got 8, 10, 15, 20 customers, right? And then they want to grow. Is the challenge that they're forgetting these two things? Is the challenge that, and maybe it's on the customer care side, if you got 20 customers, hopefully the product's working. Where are they disconnecting from this? Because I think we all know it's about the customer, right? You make your customers happy, you'll get more customers. Where do they get steered wrongly?
I think it's a great question. And, I wish I had more experience outside of just being an advisor for like an early stage startup company. Scott, I know that that's kind of your niche, but for me, I've usually joined companies after they have a little bit more groundswell, the flywheel is starting to turn, we have product market fit. And, for me, I think that as long as you can maintain that momentum and you have a service that people want to pay for, you can have a really cool idea. But if people don't want to pay for it, I think that's where a lot of companies get stuck. Or if you have I hear this on Shark Tank all the time, maybe you have a product, but you don't have a business. I think that's also where companies, can get stuck.
Yeah.
I think from what I've seen working with either like smaller scale ups or startups, or maybe even some early stage startups that I've advised or been privy to seeing some of their inside information, I guess. But I think you try to go too big too fast too. That's another trap that I think companies fall in, is they might get one large logo and they try to build their product specifically for that one company. And that, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? You want to maintain that large customer that you have that's willing to pay you more money, but you're also potentially pigeonholing yourselves from other customers that that may really benefit from your base offering, or like where you can hit maybe more of a mass market versus just one, going with one customer. So
Scott, what do you think? Like if the premise is the consistent challenge is A, having a product that works, and B, the other option that now I'm blanking on, but where do you think people get steered wrong?
Customer care.
At that customer care. Where do people, because you do work with a lot of startups, where do you think they're getting steered wrong? I know how you direct them back to it, but what's going on in their head that they think, now I can shortcut it?
I don't know the soundbite answer to this. I don't think that the product not working is the thing that sabotages people. I think it maybe stops innovating at the same rate and maybe can't keep up with the demands of the buyer and the market. Maybe a perfect example is like an AI content writing tool. 3 years ago, it was like, holy hell, what is this? Now that's a widget that every single product on the planet has. It's completely been commoditized. So to Alyson's point about you have a product but not a business, I think it's more of that. It's not so much that a product doesn't work. It's just like it's not important enough. It's not vital enough. It's not a, what do they call it? It's like a pain. It's not a vitamin. It's like a whatever. I can't remember the analogy. Anyways, it's like just not important enough. It's too much of a nice to have. So people build lots of things that are nice to haves for a lot of different reasons. One is a quick money grab. Two is it's easier. There's less barrier to entry and less friction. I do think that people get away from customer care a little bit. It's really easy to care a lot about your customers when you have 20 or 100 or whatever. You got 5,000 customers. It's pretty hard to put customer care number one, especially when, you know, Alyson's boss and Scott's boss and Richard's boss is like, great job last month getting to 25 million in 1 month in sales. Next month, your goal is 50. It's like, are we really focused on customer care at that point? No, we're not. We're focused on greed.
Yeah. Scott was my boss, and that's what happened.
Yeah, so, yeah. I was young and dumb and getting smashed upside the head by a founder that, you know, was greedy. And I didn't know any better at the time. And there was no podcast. There was no LinkedIn. There was no socialization of like information. I didn't know where to go get that kind of information.
Yeah.
So I think they do lose a little bit of luster there, but to me, it's just very hard to build something that can maintain its relevance over the course of a startup's lifespan. A normal successful startup lifespan is 7 to 10 years. So you look at a company like Outreach, for example, looked like they were solving the world's problems. Now, right or wrong, people can make the argument that you don't actually want to use the Outreach product anymore. It's not a good thing. How long has Outreach been around for? 10 years? Mm-hmm. So in 10 years from its inception, it went from like solving the world's problems is the greatest tool of all time. It's going to be the best IPO ever to, well, now what? And I think that's where they're at. Now what? Right?
Well, I think there are two points that you made. I think one, and Richard, you made this point to some extent too, or maybe Scott, you mentioned it around, you know, an AI content writer, right? Now, so many different solutions do that. And so if you're no longer relevant or you're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, how do you differentiate? And so I think with Outreach, one of the things that I found still to be true is that Outreach is a really great tool. Maybe it was known in the past for, you know, mass producing content and like, you know, sending that out to a lot of different people. But really what it's great for is following up on emails, not letting things slip through the cracks, you know, making sure that you're staying on top of your customers and making sure that you're using it in different ways. If you're still using it only for prospecting and that spray and pray approach that maybe they were once known for, then you're right. Like that's not really the right thing to do anymore. And we actually at Outreach would advise against that. But there are so many ways that you can use technology differently. And I think they've done a great way of staying relevant. I think there's also something to be said for when you have a really great idea and a concept, there are a lot of people that try to copy that. So there's a reason why AI content isn't maybe relevant anymore, or because a lot of companies do that now. Some probably do it better than maybe the first companies that started to do that, or they do it differently, or they've added another value point. And I think sometimes the market gets saturated then. You know, we've seen a lot of competition in the go-to-market software space recently, and people are consolidating. They're trying to get, instead of having a number of different point solutions, they're trying to use one solution. And I think that's where the waters can get a little muddy too.
You have experienced in the last couple of roles what I would characterize as two very different scenarios. The meteoric rise of one company like Zoom, right place, right time, holy cow, shoot to the moon. That must have been like it's probably going to sound disrespectful, but that has to be like the easiest sales job in the world during the pandemic. You can go ahead and yell at me because it's not, but that's what it feels like from the outside. But then you go there to an Outreach type tool like we've been talking about that is arguably stagnant and or on the decline. Which of those experiences and challenges do you enjoy more, and why?
So 2 points that I'll make really quick. Both Outreach and another company that I worked for when I was at Intuit had a similar experience. And then I'll share the experience at Zoom too. So a lot of people only see the rise of Zoom through the pandemic, but I was there from 2016 through 2020 when the pandemic started, and we were disrupting companies that maybe you don't hear about anymore. Like Skype for Business was a big time competitor in the early days. GoToMeeting was a big competitor.
Oh, I remember that one too. Wow.
WebEx, I mean, you hardly ever join a WebEx meeting anymore. And so those were the companies that we had a better solution for because our product worked. We made it super simple. We made it very low barrier of entry. And there were a lot of things that I think we did well, so that when the pandemic did hit, we had repeatable, scalable processes with a product that made it super easy for people to use, adopt, sign up for. I mean, you could purchase Zoom online, you could purchase through a person, you could sign a physical contract. Like we made it so easy for people to sign up. So Zoom had its own challenges though. Like, yes, during the pandemic, we were giving our product away for free to entire countries at some point. So, free doesn't necessarily help you get to your number from a commission standpoint. And then, after that, there were companies that were laying a lot of people off. So we were trying to retain as much business as we could. So it had its own set of challenges. And then when you make it super simple for people to purchase online, sometimes they purchase things that they don't need, or they don't purchase the right thing. So it didn't, from the inside, it didn't look as easy as maybe it did from the outside, but for sure, a different set of challenges, and definitely a lot of upside there too. And I couldn't be more grateful for my experience at Zoom. What I found at Outreach, and not necessarily Outreach in itself as a company, but what I found from that experience when I joined Outreach is it was a really difficult time when companies were laying a lot of people off, or maybe they didn't hit those growth targets that they expected to hit. So when you purchase ahead from a software standpoint and you purchase licenses that you don't need, or you lay off half of your sales team and you no longer need a sales solution, it becomes really challenging to hit your revenue targets. And so I had a similar experience when I was at Intuit and we were reselling Salesforce. This team had never hit their number in 2 out of 3 years of a Salesforce Intuit partnership. And so I love the challenge of turning something around, or, kind of mitigating some of the risk, or, seeing coming in with a different set of eyes or a different perspective. And that was really my experience, at Outreach. So I don't know if that answers your question, because it doesn't tell you what I like better. I like both. I think I'm a sucker for a challenge and something that that causes me to grow and look at things differently. If you look at my resume, you'll see that I don't have like an industry expertise. I don't even have, like, I went from chemical engineering actually to medical sales to software sales. So I like to change things up. And so, any challenge I think is probably my favorite challenge, I guess, if you put it that way.
Well, one of the things, let me challenge you on your challenges.
Yeah.
One of the things that is really, really difficult for anybody, and I think my hypothesis is it makes it more difficult when you ping pong around different segments, is how do you learn from the mistakes of places that you couldn't beat the average, you were there a year and a half or whatever, and pick the right places that you can be for 3 to 4 years, let's just say, so you can get mostly all the way vested. Because my hypothesis is, if I go to an early stage startup, then I go to a super late stage startup, then I'm at this other one that's like this meteoric rise, then I'm in this medical company or whatever. It's like they're all very different. You're actually not learning the mechanism of picking a winner. You're actually just dabbling and trying, and sure, you're getting all these experiences, but a bunch of experiences that don't add up to a truckload of like big payoffs and successes. Is that better than going deep in one particular thing? Like if you were always the super scale up lady, if you were always the one taking companies from 100 to 250 in ARR, and that was like your shtick, you would do you feel like you would know how to pick those ones a little better? I don't know the answer, but that my hypothesis is it becomes difficult to know which ones to pick when all of your options are open all the time. So my real question is like, how do you now apply the things that you've done really well and all the successes that you've had, of which there's been a ton, coupled with some of the things that you wish would have worked out a little better, and how do I now move forward and pick the right ones? This is the challenge I think that most sales leaders are facing right now.
Before you answer, I've notified Guinness Book of World Records to suggest that Scott's question might be the longest interview question ever asked in the history of podcasts. So, but feel free to answer that now, Alyson.
Listen. Some people can focus for longer than 60 seconds at a time, Richard. Okay.
Yes.
Well, thanks, Richard, for that. And Scott, you're talking to someone that has ADHD. So, I tend to be a little bit long-winded and can tend to ramble. So I was following you the whole time.
Oh, all right.
For me, it's interesting because I actually didn't have, well, for a lot of my journey, I was put into situations where I kind of had to choose differently. So I probably would have never left Intuit. I loved that company, but they shut down the Denver location in 2015, 2 weeks after I went back from maternity leave. So I kind of had to find a company that had a good reputation, but that, was in Denver because I just had a baby. I couldn't necessarily leave. And then, from there, I've been fortunate to usually choose companies that had really great reputation. I knew people that worked there. I've used the tool or solution myself, so I could kind of stand behind it. But I think what stands out the most from your question is, like, for me anyways, what I had to get really clear on what I wanted for certain companies. So even when I was at Intuit, I worked on startup teams within a really large company. So I still got that itch scratch that I have to not be just another cog in a wheel or a number and doing things that are 100% figured out. So that really worked for me. I worked on startup teams or like startup projects within a really large company. And then when I left SendGrid, fortunately, I was recruited away to join Zoom. Zoom was building their Denver office, and the people that I worked with at Intuit helped start that office. And they were looking for a leader. They hadn't hired anyone from the outside. So I was the first leader that they hired from the outside. So some of the situations chose me, but I had a foundation of what I was looking for. So I didn't want to work for a super huge company where I could just check a box and, maybe move the needle 0.5% by putting in 110% effort. So I like certain challenges and certain things, but I also probably wouldn't want to work for a 20-person startup. Like, I just know that that's not necessarily me. I like things to be somewhat figured out, but not 100% figured out, if that makes sense.
So what's it like working at a big company in a small world, right? Do you, where because there are lots of big companies that have sort of the innovative group, right? Or they incubate to a certain extent. And then there's a lot of companies where you said, I'm going to try and move the needle 0.5%. Did you really have that level of freedom in a big company like that? Did it feel like a startup?
Yeah, when I was, specific to that example that I shared, and then I'll share another example where I felt like I had a ton of freedom, and then all of a sudden things changed completely too. So when I was at Intuit, I led a team that at first, I became a part of Intuit through an acquisition. So I was at a startup company that was acquired by Intuit about 6 months into my time there. And then I transferred to Denver with my husband's company. And I had the opportunity to take over a team that resold Salesforce to QuickBooks users. And they had never hit their number. And so with that small team that I ran, we had about 20 people in that org. I had a lot of flexibility. I mean, they had never hit their number. We really didn't have anything to lose. So, a fresh perspective and new ideas and different ways of doing things. I had a lot of freedom, and I had a leader at the time who really had a lot else on his plate, that this one little team didn't really like move the needle for him. So the more that I could take on, the better. And that really helped to shape a lot of my leadership trajectory. The second thing was when I was at a company, a smaller company that was growing super quick. My division was actually growing the fastest at any company. I thought I had a lot of opportunity, and like I had a lot of freedom, I guess, but we also were growing really quickly. And this was when money was somewhat free. I was putting together a plan to grow my team to 70 people for the back half of the year, and presented that to my leader and like senior executive leadership. And then the next week they said, I know you just put together this second half of the year plan, but actually we need you to get your team to 10 people. We're laying off roughly 70% of the go-to-market org. And we had just received all of this funding and done all of these things. And so, you know, Scott, you talked about like me making choices. Like that's not a choice that I would have made to join a company if I had the foresight to see what would happen a year down the road.
And how do you vet that a year down the road?
You can, especially in these days and times, you can't necessarily vet for all of those things, but you try to make the best decisions that you have in the time. And so for me, staying focused on what my values are, where I know my strengths are as a leader, regardless of company or industry. I also know that I'm not like a strategic or enterprise leader. I really like the volume and the transactional, like commercial mid-market SMB space. It feeds my ADHD personality too, a lot going on. So I think you have to find certain things about yourself and know if you really like that freedom, or know if you really want more structure, or if you want a little bit of both. But for me, I think I've learned just as much, if not more, from the things that didn't work out, you know, versus the things that did.
So I have a question, because I've been through that thing too, where you have to do a massive riff, right? Where you go from however big your team is down to whatever. I was actually scaling a team down and hiring one in Iowa, while keeping both alive, secretly. What advice? It was
had that
terrible
experience too.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
Yeah, it's not fun. Scott, we could talk about it, Surf and Sales, one day if you want to hear the whole story. But and anybody else who wants to come to Surf and Sales, it's in November. Let us plug our Surf and Sales events. So please come. Only a few spots left. But my question, for the second longest wind up question, is what advice would you give to someone in leadership where they're going to have to make a riff, right? Because, and there's so much you can do, and it might be, don't do this, as opposed to here's what you should do. Because I still think it's going to happen. I think it's happening, and it's going to keep happening, and everybody's sort of pretending like it's not. They're kind of being a zombie to think that it's not going to happen anymore this year. So what advice do you give to those people? Well, to the leaders who have to do it, not
not the people that are being laid off.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I've had to do this at a couple of companies, and it's never fun, and it's never easy. And if it ever gets fun or easy, you should probably find another career, because you're either too disconnected or burnt out to have a human element anymore. You know, this happened when I was actually at Intuit, and we were nearing that 3-year relationship, and we had to divest the team. Intuit decided not to continue with that partnership. And so I had to either help find roles for my team within the company, and I had to have the unfortunate decision of letting certain people go. And so for me, not only at Intuit, but then shortly after I started at my last company, actually about a month into the role, even though we had just had a layoff, they said, we're going to have another layoff in a month. And you're going to have to get your team down to this number. And coming in as a brand new leader, being an experienced leader with a team that I built, and being a leader at a company that I didn't know anyone, had a different set of challenges. But, you know, for me, being in leadership, especially being in senior and executive leadership, you're always going to be faced with really difficult decisions that don't necessarily seem to have a right answer. So I always try to make the best data-driven decision that I can, that really makes the best decision for the business, and tries to take out as much personality, I guess. That's not the right word I'm looking for, but the most emotion, I guess, that I can.
What happens if you're going to have to pull a riff and your top rep's a complete asshole, right? Do you let him go or her, or do you keep them?
So I think, I've had to fire a top performer before. That's actually what turned the team around when I was at Intuit. And so I think sometimes like nobody wants to work with a high performing asshole. Sorry, Sue, if you're listening to this, but I think having a team that works really well together, that's on the same mission as the company, that can manage and mitigate change is, sometimes what you need to look at in those situations. Sometimes you do have to look at, maybe you're also letting go the person that's everybody's favorite, but they're just not doing what the business needs at that point. So they're all really difficult decisions. There's never an easy answer, but I think taking the best data-driven approach, and sometimes the data is like, we need a team that's going to work together, that's going to take the company where they need to be. And there can't be somebody that's not a team player, regardless of the numbers that they're hitting. Because what if one person's hitting their number, but they're detracting from the rest of everyone else hitting their number? What could you do if everyone on their team elevates because that person's no longer there? So that probably doesn't answer your question at all, because I think there's no simple.
No, I think that does answer the question, because, guess what? Number 2 can now become number 1, and the level of energy.
Number three,
and
like
right, they could. Everybody becomes energized, which is kind of it's a little bit of a baited question, but I think people need to hear it.
But has anybody ever experienced? That's my dog. Has anybody ever experienced laying off a top performer and having it not go well? No, but having it not go well? Because I haven't. Every time I've ever laid off a top performer, it's had an immediate morale boost across the whole entire company. But we're held hostage by it all the time. We're like, oh, what's going to happen if we do it? I've never talked to somebody who's like, I laid off our top performer and it backfired on me. Here's why. Ever. I've never heard somebody say that. Have you?
Awesome.
Neither of you?
No.
Neither of you?
No, I have not.
Okay, there we go.
So
we got to move towards wrapping up. We've been flying through this episode so far. We appreciate you spending some time with us, and a special shout out to Alyson's mother-in-law, Sue Baber, who is very good friends with my mother, Angela Leese. Grew up in the same town as Alyson's husband, Scott Baber. The two Scotts used to play tennis against each other in Chico, California. So special shout out to the moms who are probably listening to this episode. How can we be helpful to you? Is there any question or questions that you want to ask us before we get out of here?
Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm two of my biggest I guess role models in this space, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity. I am kind of curious. You mentioned surf and sales, and I know that you have an event or an opportunity, or I guess what would you call it, a retreat coming up in November. What is the word to use?
It's called a life-changing moment.
But
it really is. It really is.
I've heard
nobody buys life-changing moments, Richard. Maybe this is why we still have 5 tickets left to sell, because you're selling it as a life-changing moment. People hear that and they're like, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Well,
that's my first curse word. You got me to curse. I told my mom I wouldn't curse. I made it 46 minutes and 33 seconds into this episode without cursing, and Richard did it to me.
My job is complete here.
It's a micro sales conference is what we call it. It's a micro event.
Well, it sounds like an amazing opportunity. I guess, I mean, I can be persuaded, since I would be leaving Colorado in a very cold time of year to go to Costa Rica, which sounds like an awesome experience. But do you have to know how to surf?
No, 90% of the people who come to Surf and Sales have never surfed before at all, let alone be any good at it. We hire.
I am still learning.
And we make it real easy. It's warm water, no rocks, no wildlife, no reef, gentle, like 2 to 3 foot waves, local surf instructors giving lessons to people who don't know what they're doing. Very, very mellow.
No wildlife, no rocks, warm water. Sounds right up my alley.
Yeah.
No, if there were no spiders or no bugs, like I could be.
I cannot guarantee
Cannot.
there are no
Cannot.
bugs in Costa Rica. Sorry about that.
But it's not a bug infestation either. It's, you know, it's not like the deep South where, you know, summertime comes and you got gnats and bees and all that kind of stuff. So, it was fun, and it is different than anything else because it's not crammed full of content. It's not a bro fest. People are not going to bars every night. It is the place to come and learn something you don't learn normally, and or connect with people in a way that you've never thought you'd be able to connect with, and learn from people. And to a certain extent, get out of your comfort zone just a little bit in the healthiest and safest space, right? Like we really do have like a no asshole policy. We say it every show, every time, is like, we've never sent anybody home, but we will. And we say it on the first night because that's the experience we want people to have. And speaking of content, Scott, you saw my post. I asked people what kind of content would they want. And someone just said, how to pick a good founder if you're a masochist who loves startups. So Scott, I'm going to let you run that session.
Yeah, that'll be
that's
my
a good
specialty.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it's pretty cool. And we'd love to have you.
That's
So,
great.
yeah.
Well, I might have to persuade another Scott to give me the opportunity, or maybe I persuade him to come along with me because he's
Well,
in
here's the pro move.
Well,
The pro move is,
yes,
you tell the family to come out on the very last day of the event, and it backs up into Thanksgiving. So you just tell the family, why don't we just spend Thanksgiving in Costa Rica? And then everybody kind of gets what they want. That's the pro move.
that is the pro move. 100%. So, and if you need a note, Scott Leese will write one.
Right.
Since he knows your husband, he knows how to write it. So
yeah,
or
we can all be persuaded to come.
we'll use an AI tool to write the note to convince your husband. So
there we go.
Alyson, how can people get a hold of you? Thank you for your time today.
The best way to get in touch with me is LinkedIn. I'm a little slower to respond these days just because I'm taking a bit of a career break to spend more time with my family. And I've already taken my kids to school more times this week than I have all of last year. So LinkedIn is still the best way to get in touch with me, but I'd love to connect with anyone that might want to.
Are you on a slow roll job hunt?
I am not looking right now. I don't even know, to be candid, if I want to re-enter the corporate world. I think I might want to do some coaching, advisory, other leaders. Yeah, some project work. But right now I'm just enjoying, getting projects done around the house, spending time with my kids, and being a mom.
Yeah. So people, look, she's worked at Intuit, she's worked at Zoom, she's worked at Outreach, she's worked at all the startup places we all have thought about, wanted to work at. So if you're looking for an advisor that's not Scott Leese or Richard Harris, absolutely reach out to Alyson.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. It was so great to connect with you, and maybe you'll see me in November.
We would love to.
Thanks for being on the show,
non-existent surf skills.
All right.